I think we should be live. I'm going to go ahead and check the streams real quick. And if people are already here joining, say hello in the chat. And if you want to add a little bit about yourself in the chat, that'd be awesome. Or where you're watching from, that's always fun to kind of see. And if you want to throw in maybe why you're interested in learning more about user experimentation. So if you're working on an interesting AI project or something like that, put that in the chat as well. And we'll get going here in a moment. Again, just making sure we are live. Looks good. But again, if anyone else in the chat watching wants to say hello and that you can hear us, it's always good to double check with people on the other end as well. And throw where you're watching from. I'm streaming from Seattle. And Tim, I think you are also around in the Seattle area.
Yeah, we're here in Bellevue, just across the lake.
Nice. The east side.
East side.
Which I go over there a lot now too. So, but I'm actually over in the west side right now. So, all right, and we'll get going here in a minute. I'll do a quick introduction. So, welcome everyone. My name is Sage Elliott. I'll be the host for today's Union Fireside Chat. At Union, we build tools around ML orchestration and making data and AI pipelines more robust. You might know us, like a lot of people know us from our open source work with Flyte, Flyte, and Pandera. But you can check out everything else we're doing at Union.ai. We have a lot of cool stuff coming out really soon. So I definitely recommend following us, wherever you want to see the stuff that we have coming out soon. But today's chat is not about us. We have Tim from Statsig. Welcome, Tim. How are you doing today?
I'm doing awesome. Thanks for inviting me, Sage.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to learn more about user experimentation, especially in AI applications. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to be pretty interested in it. Before we dive into that, could you give us a quick introduction and maybe a little bit about your background, like how you got into this field, and then a little bit about what you're working on, although I'm sure we're going to dive more into that later.
Gotcha. Yeah. I'm currently head of data at Statsig. So it's we provide a modern suite of analytics tools and engineering tools for product teams. So this includes feature flags, experimentation, analytics. Although to be honest, we're best known for experimentation. We have many AI customers, including OpenAI and Anthropic, and many of our customers we've helped them launch AI products. For example, Notion AI was launched using Statsig. Before I came to Statsig, I've been here 3 years since the start. I was actually at Meta, where I worked on like the Facebook Blue app. I've worked on gaming. I was also in Facebook Reality Labs, working on their AI assistant. And then before that, I sort of did a career change. I was in a different career. I am a card-carrying scientist, I like to tell people, because I was actually designing drugs in the biotech industry for diseases like lupus and Alzheimer's.
That's awesome. And what a cool, I'm sure there's a lot of overlap in skills, but kind of a career switch that happened. And yeah, that's awesome background. And you mentioned, just some small AI companies that maybe people have heard of that are using, your knowledge around experimentation, which is incredible. Right. So the main topic today is user experimentation for AI applications. But before we get more into that AI application part, maybe we could talk a little bit about just what is user experimentation. Would you be able to, just tell us what is user experimentation, not necessarily in the frame of AI applications even?
Yeah, sure. There's a whole field called product analytics, which is really understanding your product and how users interact with it. And the way it's typically done is you're given, as a data scientist, like a large data set, or you've got multiple data sets, and you're really trying to understand where your product is doing well and where your product is not doing well. And you looking for things like where you find relationships. For example, if you slice by gender, like do certain people have higher engagement or affinity? You're trying to figure out if folks actually go through and are running and are, for example, accepting the free trial. What happens to those users down the road? There's a lot of stuff where you're trying to infer a relationship between like two variables and trying to understand whether that's causation or correlation. And this is, every data scientist runs into this over and over and over again. Every finding you have can be chalked up to correlation, not causation. And what makes user experimentation really cool is actually the scientific gold standard for establishing causality. So you can actually know through a test that X actually drives Y, and you can actually quantify that and know exactly what percentage lift that effect is happening at.
And outside of AI stuff, which we'll jump in here in a little bit, what are some of the other popular, or not popular, but like, I don't use cases that people are using this for? Like you mentioned some, but I assume it's like, every website, for example, could probably be using user experimentation, or online shopping, all these different things. And there's different variables, like you mentioned, that people can change. That might be even something like a color of a button, or something that simple, right?
Yeah. So I think the world of online experimentation is best known for like website optimization, where like the classical button test of like trying to like what happens if we change the shape and color of this button? Can people click on it more? Those are pretty good examples because I think it's very easy to visualize how that test works, but I think it's also very boring in terms of like what it can do. What I saw when I was at Facebook was like the test you would run was like actually providing users a brand new experience and trying to understand like, is this new experience better? Does it actually show value? Are users engaging with this day over day? Are they coming back? Are they inviting their friends to it? Is there any sort of virality happening? And is this augmenting the rest of the ecosystem in the long term in a sustained and durable way? That to me is like way more interesting than just a simple button test. It actually starts to suggest whether the feature is providing business value. But then there's also the world of A/B testing can get way more sophisticated than that. You can actually go into like, for example, back-end infrastructure experiment. If you're, for example, if you're a credit card processor, what happens if you change the routing algorithm? Will you get a higher success rate? Will you lower your latency? Those kind of things are really hard to simulate or do offline testing. You really have to do real world testing in a controlled fashion, and that's where A/B testing steps in. So, and then we've also started to see folks do. There's also real world A/B testing where, for example, if you have a physical store, you can actually start testing. If, for example, if you're Walmart, what happens if you slightly change the layout? What happens if you change the first set of upsells that a user sees when they walk in? Does that change their behavior, and do those actually work? So that's where like A/B testing can be used for a wide variety of different changes you're making to it, digital and online and physical products.
And I think those are way more exciting examples than my button example. Yeah, and I love like the fact like you're saying, you can measure this throughout the whole ecosystem, not just a single page or something like that, a whole experience. Like at Meta, they have a whole ecosystem involved. Many products do, and you can measure that change kind of echoed throughout the whole space. That's really cool to hear. And before our next question, I just saw a whole bunch of people join. So I'll say, if you're watching live, say hello in the chat. It's really fun to kind of see, people that are watching or tuning in live. And if you want to put in where you're watching from, that's always really fun as well. So now that we know a little bit more about user experimentation and how it can, not just be a button and actually be measured or measure a lot of really cool things around your product, how is user experimentation helping people build better AI applications?
The reason why you'd want to do user experimentation is you're actually getting real data from real users and seeing how they're finding out what changes and modulates their behavior, and finding ways that you can actually measure, is my product delivering value to customers? If you are an e-retailer, are people actually purchasing more? If you're a social media app, are they actually using you more? Are they actually engaging with their friends? Things like that. So experimentation in AI is the same as experimentation in any other product. You want to know you want to have a measure from the user, and almost like the user has a say, whether the product is useful, and then you can use that information to optimize your product. In the field of AI, there's a lot you can do to optimize. You can do things like there's thousands of parameters. There's different models. There's token links you can do. There's a lot of things around affecting performance, such as latency. You may want to track your costs. You can ask directly for user feedback. You can also look at behavior metrics. There's a lot of things you can measure. For me in AI, where I think a lot of folks get hung up is There's a lot of testing that happens in AI that's usually in the offline world. So you can have a developer that basically says, like, I have a new model, I've trained it on new data, this has to be better. And they can do the sniff test and say, like, yeah, this looks good. Then you can also be a little bit more rigorous and go, like, you know what, we can actually get this labeled offline with a small group and sort of feel like, okay, we've got a whole bunch of scenarios that we've created that our product should do well in, that the AI has been trained for. We can actually benchmark that. But that's still sort of like artificial and contrived and also very expensive to do. And it doesn't really answer the question of, like, what happens when you put it in front of real users? What happens if you put it in front of thousands of users from a very wide variety of diverse backgrounds that may not work in tech? And the other thing I found that experimentation captures that offline testing does not is that user behavior is very dynamic and can actually change with your product. The user may come in not knowing what to expect, but after the changes sort of set expectations, they come in the next day with a different set of behaviors. And so monitoring that change over time is something that user experimentation, and only user experimentation can get you.
Yeah. Do you have like maybe a use case or an example where, like, you've seen, and you don't have to name the company or anything like that, or maybe it's been a personal project, but where you've used or seen experimentation used, and then it's kind of significantly, maybe it influenced the development or caused some changes that really improved the application?
Yeah. One of my favorite examples is in the building of a voice assistant. A lot of folks think of voice assistants as like Alexa and Google, and are very familiar with what they can do. But if you're starting to build a voice assistant from scratch, and you just kind of throw it in front of a user, you don't have the benefit of having a UI or a screen that can tell you what it can do. Users just come in and sort of just start shouting commands at it. One thing that I've learned is that the whole world of when you have this unstructured freeform sort of input and interaction from a user, it's actually really important to guide a user and let people know what your assistant can do and what it's really good at and what it's been built for. And I call that user education. And user education is tremendously helpful, as I've seen in the world of voice assistants. Alexa actually does a lot of email campaigns and sort of like upsells on there. They do a lot of advertising and commercials. But for everyone else, guide your users, walk them through initial set a few steps, and that helps set expectations and makes a big difference on their engagement and long-term usage of the product.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's probably also why, all my voice assistants, after I ask them something, then they're always trying to tell me something else they can do. Right? Because I actually don't know what they can do. Besides, like, for me, I ask it about the weather a lot. I don't know about anyone else. I feel like that's like the common thing. And then they're always like, oh, by the way, I can also tell you way more than just the weather. That's all you've been asking for a year. I can actually do more than that.
So when I was working on Facebook has a voice assistant, and when I was working on that program, the number one request for time was, what time is it in Beijing? And I remember thinking, like, that's weird. Like, this is Facebook. We don't really have a lot of users in Beijing. But then I could trace that back to, we actually literally had a prompt that said, like, hey, this is something you can try. You can ask what time it is in Beijing. And people would literally parrot that and just to try to see if it works. But I actually feel like that is still an important demonstration, because if a user is trying to guess what your assistant can do, probably the first 3 or 4 things that the user will try may work or may not work. But if you actually give them some things that do work, they're more likely to retain with the product and stick with it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. I never thought, like, the voice assistant's such a good use case for that. I love that one. I love that you brought that up, because that's so true. You don't have overlays that can pop up and say, hey, did you know you can do this? You have to educate them in certain ways, and being able to measure that seems incredibly important, and almost maybe a little bit, I don't know if it's harder to measure, but definitely different to measure than, like, are people clicking on these things or seeing these, like, tutorials that pop up.
Yeah, and you can actually monitor, long-term usage. If we introduce a user to this command, are they more likely to use the assistant in the following week or month? Like these are
Yeah,
things you can quantify and try to figure out like what is actually the best thing to recommend to users on the day one.
yeah, and so you could do something like potentially like an A/B test with that almost too, right? Like here's different examples of like educating the user with what they do or what the voice assistant can do, whether that's saying it after they ask the question or like email campaigns, like you said, and then seeing the effects of that kind of over time with the user and maybe the variations, or if it's added new variations. Like if I'd stopped just asking about the weather, that might be a good sign of success potentially, right?
Yeah, I think that one thing we were trying to understand was if you introduce a user to a certain domain like weather, what is their chance they actually might start self-learning other things? Is there one set of commands that actually unlocks a bunch of others? So you can be really efficient with how you use those upsells.
That's very interesting. This ties really well into our next question is, could you share a little bit about maybe some metrics or indicators that you prioritize to measure the success of those user experimentations, specifically in the AI applications like we've been talking about?
Yeah, I can just speak very generically about sort of how I categorize metrics. For I would do the same categorization for any product, but for AI products specifically. So you can have, if I'm thinking of like an LLM, you can think about turn-based metrics. So the most obvious one is success rate. You might be able to get some measure of like, did a user, were they generally happy? You can ask them for that goal, or you can do some offline labeling. The other ways, you can also count how many turns or how long and sophisticated those turns. You can understand what categories end up becoming more important. You can collect customer feedback. So I think several of these AI apps actually ask users like, "Were you satisfied with this response?" And they'll put like a big yes or no, or you may want to give it like 1 to 5 stars. You can understand performance metrics, so understanding things like latency, how long did things take. Um, you can understand also costs if that's a concern for you. You can, and then my favorite is really like customer behavior metrics. This is where it's like turn-based metrics. You're sort of monitoring how users behave, but this is across multiple turns or multiple sessions or multiple days. Understanding like really is there a sustained effect that's going on beyond just like a novelty. And this could be, things like retention. How many sessions did a user have? Did a user uninstall an app? Is also would be like a negative signal. And then generally, what you want to get closer and closer to is like the business metrics, things that really matter. So if you are a subscription-based product, like did a user convert from a free trial to a subscription? Did we increase the probability or retention rate of somebody renewing their subscription? Did they upgrade their subscription? Like these are things that the businesses do care about, and you would like to get some indication that your change like didn't just make people happier, that there was actually like an end goal that's material to the business that was
Yeah,
achieved. Yeah.
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of really good metrics there that you can start capturing. And again, this ties good to the next question too, is what advice would you give someone to, thinking about implementing user experimentation for AI applications? So all the stuff you kind of talked about, I think this is probably, I'm guessing the answer is going to be like, set kind of some objectives of what you want to measure. Just like you said, there's that user piece of it. Like, are people enjoying this application or, this chat bot or whatever it is? And you have the metrics, like people are using it, they get the thumbs up, stuff like that. And then there's like the business metrics, like you had mentioned. I guess, what would be your advice for someone just setting up user experimentation for an AI application for the first time?
Okay. Let me answer this in 2 ways. The first is I would encourage people to just get started. It's very easy in the world of experimentation to overcomplicate things and to think too hard about like, oh, which are the set of metrics I need? Do I actually have this test set up properly? Do I have enough users? Do I have telemetry all in place? Um, and those things I find can get in the way of just getting started. I think the most important thing is just get it started, get something launched, get something run as an A/B test. There are features you're continually building. Put one of them behind a slow rollout and start monitoring it when you're at 50-50, whether that's doing anything to the users. That to me is like the biggest barrier I see for most folks is just like they don't know how to get started, and so that actually stops them. Whereas I would say like just get a test going, get some metrics flowing, and then later on figure out how that works. When you're at a stage where like you're comfortable with that process, then you can start thinking about what is the change I'm making, and what effect am I trying to drive? And that's where I would call that's your hypothesis. And then you can also start thinking about what other metrics do I also care about or worry about, that might go wrong. If you are launching a new feature in a mobile app, an increase in crash rates is probably not a good thing. So you could have like sort of a suite of metrics that you can start to understand and piece together. And then I would also ask, do I have enough statistical power? I will argue that even if you don't have enough users or statistical power, it's still better to get some measurement, rather than just build features in the dark. For example, if you end up finding a minus 50% regression in some really key metric, that would be reasons to stop. And if you don't even have any monitoring in place through an A/B test, you won't be able to pick that up. So I think number one, folks should get started. Number two, it's just very easy to start thinking about what are just a handful of metrics I need to get in place that are related to the change I'm making, and get those up and running.
I love it. I love always the get started, start measuring, then you can adjust these metrics over time, right? Like maybe you started with, hopefully it's too few and you add more in, but you could also potentially start with maybe too many and figure out that that's just adding noise and not actually delivering a good signal for you. And then you can kind of scale it back, right?
Yeah, and I think when you're actually looking at results, you'll start to ask other questions, and that will help you start to guide how you can set up the next test to be more effective.
Awesome. And actually, someone has a really good question related to this: is it more valuable to A/B test users or sessions? I don't know if you have a thought on that.
Sessions are way easier to A/B test on because you don't have to sort of keep track of that user over multiple sessions and multiple days. However, I think for things that actually matter to you as a product builder, you probably care about doing an A/B test on the user level. You want to know uh, whether this effect is sustained for multiple days. So I would say, like, if that is what you are thinking about for your test, you'll absolutely want to track at the user level. It gets a little bit confusing for a user as well when they come into session after session and it's a different experience every time. And then it starts to become unclear over what you are measuring, if it's, at least particularly, like, you won't get any long-term effects in that measurement.
I could see that being pretty interesting, being the user coming in with, like, if you're keep returning to this product and it's shifting around slightly all the time. Like, I've been on some products where I assume they're doing something like that, and I'll be like, why is this thing bouncing around? Like it, going back to the button example or something, it literally was a button, but it's like, it would be like on the other side, and then I come back, I'd be on the other side, and I would be, trying to instinctively click it or something while scrolling, and it would be bouncing
Yeah.
around. I'm sure that's an A/B test on a user or something, like you were saying, and it's kind of weird when I come back and it's shifting around.
Yeah. So something we saw at Facebook was a user's first experience with a test. It can be very different than their long-term experience. There's a little bit of training the user, like, hey, we've invented this new surface. It may be a completely redesign and everything is shifted. And users might hate it at first, but grow to love it, or users might love it at first and grow to hate it. And that's where you actually want to capture that long-term effect and behavior change.
And yeah, so someone made a comment. I think they're saying, like, if you're changing around stuff a lot like that in a session or for a user, it's like can become a question to the user, like, is it a bug or is it a feature?
Yeah, I have one rule of A/B testing is that the user should never ever know they're in a test. And when that starts to happen, I know in today's day and age, people start questioning, like, is there a test going on?
That's so true. I definitely think that sometimes. All right, so we've talked a lot about how people could get started with this. Some really cool use cases and examples of how user experimentation is used in AI applications and without it. And you're working on really cool stuff all around this. As far as I know, it's really what you're focused on at Statsig. Could you tell us a little bit more about, like, what Statsig is doing in this space and potentially, why people should go check it out if they're interested in this topic?
We firmly believe, just from our experiences and seeing how big tech companies work, that experimentation is how you build successful products. It's how companies like Uber, Facebook, Instagram, all the big guys got to their size is just through this ruthless optimization, through ubiquitous experimentation. Unfortunately, this sort of being able to run these sort of analyses and set up experiments is pretty onerous for like small to medium-sized companies. You usually have to build a large infrastructure. And what Statsig has done is we have made this infrastructure and set up as seamless as possible, integrated and easy. So you can get what the big tech companies are doing, the sophisticated stats engine and the feature releases and the controls, all in place just by plugging into Statsig. And we're seeing a lot of particularly startup companies really do well and succeed. We've also seen a lot of companies been able to scale their experimentation programs. If they may be running 1 a week, they are now at a place where they're running 10 a week, just because we've made it very accessible and easy. It's also very easy to do follow-up analyses. Usually, as a data scientist, I hated when I had an A/B test and someone would ask a follow-up question, because that would involve like another like day of work to be able to answer that. And with Statsig, we've been able to create things like custom queries where you can easily dive into the data and rapidly explore alternate hypotheses and what else is going on. And that actually facilitates and makes decision making within your org much easier.
Awesome. And not only is it a really cool like tool around this, I think you have like a pretty active community. Like if people have, questions, like people are asking here about, how do I get started with experimentation, is going to like the Statsig's website or the Slack channel going to be one of the best places to kind of get those questions answered?
What I totally recommend for folks is we do have a Slack channel. But the key thing is that Statsig is actually free to try. You can come in right now, walk in, create an account, and just get started. Get the SDK installed on board, see how it works, and you can actually start putting a feature behind a feature gate and be able to start monitoring metrics. That's all free and accessible. And if you have any questions on how things are working, or you don't understand why you're seeing certain results, you can just join the Slack community. I'm there. I respond to messages, so feel free to you can even ping me directly. I might regret saying that, but we are very accessible. We believe experimentation should work for everybody, and so that's why we have made it where you don't, without swiping a credit card, you can actually get up and running.
Awesome. And someone even asked a question about how they're trying to right now, I think, understand how to leverage Statsig in a simple POC without integrating into like a toy project. So it sounds like you can get started for free and, potentially already integrate this into the thing you're building pretty easily.
Yeah, we have a lot of walkthrough guides on how to get your first feature created. But what I recommend is playing around in a toy example just to sort of understand, how does a feature gate work? How do you turn it on and off? How do you target users? And then you can just plug it into your normal app. If you're using a feature flagging tool, any of the other feature flagging tools are out there, you'll find the concepts are very similar and familiar. But if you're not, it's not too complicated. So I would highly recommend. This is sort of become modern software engineering best practices now to put things behind a feature gate. The secret that we've added is putting analytics behind that process.
Awesome. And the link to Statsig is in the description if you're watching this on YouTube, whether it's live right now or you came back and are watching a recording. The links in the description, as well as links to Tim's LinkedIn as well. And then you could join their Slack channel. Like they said, you can message directly in there. And if you have questions about Statsig or user experimentation, probably a great place to get started. I'll also just quickly note that you have, I'll share it in the live chat right now. Go to the statsig.com/pets page is one of my favorite web pages ever, I feel like right now. So
we are a dog friendly office. We've got our dogs in there. Yeah, I would recommend folks check that out. That's good for a few laughs.
And are you hiring right now? I feel like I've seen that.
Yes, so my team specifically is looking for data scientists who are really proficient in coding and also statistics. We're also looking for data engineers. We are currently processing, last time I checked, 600 billion events a day for customers. That number is growing exponentially. If that kind of things doesn't scare you and it gets you excited, this is where you want to be at Statsig.
Maybe you can scare them a little bit, but still be excited.
I think there was a CEO I used to work for said that there's a fine balance between fear and fun. You need a little bit of fear to have fun. That's like the whole concept behind a roller coaster. So Statsig is definitely a roller coaster.
But in the best way. That sounds awesome. Like that's like a really cool problem to be working on right now. And I like, to me, Statsig's like the leader in the space too, just from what I've seen out there. If you're trying to bring this into your product, like Statsig is the company I see and what I would go to. What are you looking forward to in the AI field outside of, let's say, user experimentation advancements?
The thing that excites me the most, and I don't know if we talk about this enough, is AI is going to unlock new modes of interactions. Right now, everything that's a product is on a mobile app with a touch screen or using a keyboard and mouse. We are starting to enter where AI starts to unlock new modes of interaction. So, except for example, VS Code has the type ahead where like now we're trying to find ways to make UI feel very natural to software engineers. There are folks who are experimenting with like how do you there's also ChatGPT brought back the chatbot. Like that was a format that had died, and now all of a sudden that's come back. Really looking forward to seeing folks experiment more with like what is the best way to interact with these AI agents. What are ways that we haven't thought of yet? I think there's actually a lot of opportunities for UX researchers to try some really neat things, and really looking forward to seeing how this becomes more natural and much more useful for users.
Yeah, there's been interesting, even new hardware projects, I think, coming around the space. Like I forget if it's called Rabbit or something. I think there's several of them that came out that are kind of like a whole redesign. And maybe we're not really quite ready for that yet because our phones are really good. But if you are just wearing something, or you put on a reality headset from Meta at some point or something, where you have these really good computer vision systems now where you can actually do like natural hand gestures and they work super well and it doesn't feel hard to do. That'll be interesting to kind of see how that evolves over time.
Yeah, I think what's going to happen is our devices that we use will get smaller and smaller, and we won't be able to do things like type on a keyboard. And so, what are those new modes of interactions that are going to happen? And so, a lot of things like hand gestures are already happening in the world of VR. I could see that coming to be a little bit closer and more familiar. But I think there's things we haven't even thought of that are coming down the road.
In 20 years, kids won't even know what a keyboard is. That's what I'm hearing. Potentially.
Yeah, if you ever give a kid a mouse, they get for the first time, they're pretty confused because they're used to like an iPad and like things and move it.
Yeah. That's right. Actually, yeah, I don't have kids, but I've heard that with other people. It's like, yeah, everyone's using iPads and phones and they know how to do everything on there incredibly well, but maybe they haven't actually used a PC, or laptops have trackpads, so they always use that and they actually don't use external mice. That's very interesting to think about. All right, so I know we're just a little bit over our time here. Is there anything else you want to shout out around things you have going on or things going on at Statsig?
I appreciate you giving a shout out for my LinkedIn account. I could use more followers. I talk a lot about experimentation and really just driving best practices and trying to stay away from the really heavy statistics stuff that gets people confused. We want to make experimentation accessible, so follow me if you can. Otherwise, like I'm around giving talks at places, for example, like this fireside chat with here. So really excited for some of that, and I'll be out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you everyone for coming and listening and asking questions. And I did see some other questions that we weren't able to get to, but they were very specific around using Statsig. And so I would recommend that you go join the Statsig Slack channel and go ask those directly there, or go follow or connect with Tim on LinkedIn and maybe message him there as well. But I know, at least me personally, it's nicer when people ask in the Slack channel so other people can see it as well. So if you do have those questions still after this talk, please go join the Statsig community and ask them there. And I'm sure someone, if not Tim, will probably answer them for you.
Yeah, drop in. Why don't we try an experiment? Why don't you drop in and say hi to me? Tag me directly.
Perfect. I love it. Well, we're going to wrap up the live stream, so I'll go ahead and hit end here. But again, thank you so much for coming on, Tim. And again, thank you for everyone for attending and asking questions. And don't
Thanks,
forget
everyone.
to check out the links in the description. And hopefully we'll see you all on another stream sometime. So I'm going to hit end now. Usually lags like a minute.